My name is Nick Sheltrown. I'm the Vice President of Analytics for National Heritage Academies, and I'm here to tell you that your data lack value. Now, you probably say, like, we've never met. How do I know this? I know this because I've been working in data analytics in education for 15 years with a lot of districts across the country, private sector, public sector, now charter sector for a long time. And in my experience, and you hear this a lot actually around this conference, that schools have a lot of data, have access to data, but often don't realize the value in it. And so at NHA, where I work, we've been on a 10-year journey that I'm going to share in about 7 minutes with you about how to kind of get value from our data. A little bit about NHA. So we're an 84-school charter network that operates in the 9 states in blue. So it's one thing that's kind of unusual about our context is that we're trying to solve some of the fundamental problems that have faced education in this country for maybe hundreds of years, and we're trying to do that over a 1,500-mile kind of radius. So kind of never been done before type stuff, and we see, or at least continue to see data as an opportunity for us to be a smarter, faster, better organization meeting our students' needs. And so that's why we began to kind of embark on this data journey. When you're so spread out, it's hard to know what's going on across your whole network because you can't be at every school every day in person. And so how can you use data to make decision making across the network more effective? So that's if you've ever taken inferential statistics, my null hypothesis is your data lacks value. I'm trying to get this to click. I'm going to skip that. So this is kind of the first learning that we had, I think, as an organization. So we all, at this time in the organization's history, we'd all read the book Moneyball, and we're kind of enamored with the idea of organizations that use data to operate more effectively. And so we wanted to get started about 10 years ago. It's like, well, how do you start on the whole data journey? And where we began was building out this pyramid. And this pyramid describes, I think, the analytics journey that you can take if you really want to do this to the nth degree. So all analytics work begins with measurement. You always have to start with measures because measures are where you get your data from, right? So are you measuring the right things? Most of the time, I think we found that often we weren't, and so we had to expand our measurements in some areas and retract them in others. Those measures, next layer up, produce data, and that data is stored in a warehouse, well organized and related to each other so that we have something to work with, right? And that's its own effort that you have to embark on. When you take that data and you begin to report on it and situate it in a meaningful context, we call that information, right? And so if I told you, for example, that the average weight of a male on my street is 73 kilograms, you would say, like, okay, I'm not sure what to make of that, unless you know, well, what's the average weight of a U.S. male in kilograms, right? So you have to have something to kind of give it context. And so that's what information is when you situate data in context, that's when you create information. And so that's where I think just those first 3 layers is like 80% of the possible value analytics in education organizations is really realized along those first kind of 3 steps of the pyramid. Just telling people what's going on in the organization in context is a huge value, and I'll give you some examples of that. And so then you move up from information to diagnostics, and diagnostics is really about finding out what's right and what's wrong with your organization. So using the information and looking for gaps and opportunities. After you answer the question about what's right or what's wrong, then the next question is predictive. What will happen? So how do you use data to build predictive analytics to kind of forecast future outcomes, absent intervention? And lastly, now that you know where things will go if things don't change, what are you going to do differently? Prescriptive analytics. And that's the pyramid that we work off, and that's what we build on. So we did all that, and it still didn't make a big difference, right? So we built this really robust data infrastructure, 20 people working on it, and between people and technology, what we learned was that all that stuff that I just talked about, all of the, from measurement up to prescriptive analytics is necessary but not sufficient. That ultimately data are used by people. So how do you get people engaged to use the good evidence you have? And if I had to reduce this 7-minute talk down to kind of like one sentence, it's that when you're using data, the questions are a lot more important than anything else, right? Asking the right questions. And so in the last year, we've begun to report out our data always in this pattern of 5 questions. And this is what I wanted to really build all those other slides, it's just to share these 5 questions right here. So when we're sharing data, we're always talking about 5 things. What happened? Why did it happen? What's happening right now? What will happen? And what should we do about it? So what happened is, sorry, I'm trying to get this to click. What happened is your traditional kind of conventional BI thinking where you're doing, some people say an autopsy. I like to think about it archaeologically, saying basically for us, we're focused on learning outcomes and enrollment outcomes. Those are our 2 bottom lines. So when we're taking our data, we're looking at what's happening in the past, and we're just trying to figure out, hey, what happened? What happened with state test scores? What happened with enrollment? Just what's going on with our terminal kind of outcomes. After we do a good job reporting on that, then we try and answer the question using root cause. Why did that happen? And so, for example, like if we see a pattern of chronic absenteeism going up, where it kind of flutters between 16 and 17% and then shoots up the last 3 years to 21%, what are things that you could look at causally to try and understand what's driving absenteeism up? Maybe it's that our definition of absenteeism has changed in that time. That happens with states. Maybe it's student engagement or student disciplines change in that period. Maybe it's parent engagement. Maybe it's a combination of those. We built root cause dashboards to help us answer these questions more quickly and effectively. So this is the one that we built for state test scores. So whenever we get state test scores and our 9 states in and scores are changing, we take a look at this and try and figure out why did scores go up and down. And so there's many different components between what's happening with students or teachers or growth or learning culture. The third question is probably one of my favorites. What's happening right now? This is where we collect a bunch of real-time indicators across our district or our network. And you can see some of those examples there. But this is where you're trying to give the user an insight into not what happened last year on state test scores or why that changed, but really what's going on in our buildings right at this moment in enrollment or assessments of learning or employee engagement or open positions or whatever. And so we've got a long list there that we go. Here's one of the many kind of data views we produce in there. It's hard to read from your seats, but this is a calculation of instructional loss, which is basically whenever we have an open position that we don't have filled with a permanent teacher, we call that instructional loss. We calculate it, and if a school goes over 5.5%, then we hit red. What will happen is predictive analytics, and I wish I had time to say more about that, but the most important question I think I want to end with is the one my boss is always fond of asking is, given this, what should we do? And that's the part where you really have to create a conversation between yourself and the stakeholders, the end users, to figure out how you're actually going to change decision making kind of moving forward. Does this work? Well, we're only a year into to using this framework, but I think our data journey, along with other components, have led to better learning outcomes in our organization than what we had prior. So I think we're seeing some traction, and I hope to see more. Thank you.